Hey, welcome back to Building What Matters. I'm glad that you're here. This is episode 3. And I want to be honest with you, I'm still finding my footing with this podcast. I don't have any kind of intro yet or any catchphrases. I'm sure that'll be coming down the line. And what I do have, though, is a story. And the more I share it with people, the more I realize it's not just my story. I keep having conversations where someone looks at me and says, "Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. You've been reading my mind," or "What you're saying really hits home with me." And I feel that. So my hope today is that somewhere in what I'm about to share, you see yourself, or you pick up something useful, or at the very least, you finish this episode feeling a little less alone in whatever it is that you're navigating right now. Here's what we're going to cover today. I've been writing a 3-part series on my Substack called The Pocket, and today I want to walk you through all 3 pieces together, conversationally, the way I would tell it to a friend over coffee. And the pieces that I wrote are called "I'm Not Interested in Being Impressive Anymore." The second one is "What Yours is Worth Protecting." And the third one is "Living Parallel to Empire." Big titles, real stuff underneath them. So let's go ahead and get into it. So let me start with a statement that kind of surprised me when it came out of me. And that was, I'm not interested in being impressive anymore. I think when that finally landed home for me and I finally realized that is where I'm at, I realized that I had grown. And, what I find myself being more interested in now is being aligned. And that work is harder, but it's lasting and it's important to me. And I want to sit with that for a second because I think there's a difference there that's worth talking about. For a long time, and I mean a long time, I cared about how things looked, how they landed, whether people saw me a certain way, whether I was coming across as competent, put together, like I had it figured out, that if I ever rocked the boat with people, I quickly changed. And that just didn't sit well with me over a long period of time. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to do things well. I want to make sure that I say that. But caring about quality and caring about how you show up, that's not the problem. The problem is when the doing well becomes more about the appearance of doing well than actually doing well. At some point I looked up and I realized you can build an impressive life that doesn't actually feel like yours. And that is a hard place to be at. Because from the outside looking in, everything looks fine. Everything actually looks great. But on the inside, something's off. Something doesn't quite fit right. It's like wearing a suit that's the right size on paper, but just doesn't fit right on you. And that's where I was. And here's what it looked like practically for me. Because I don't want to just talk about this in abstract terms. I was on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, you name it, I was on it. And I was writing. And I love to write. But then that's not necessarily the issue. But what I was writing something for Facebook. And then I was cutting it down for Instagram. And then I was trimming it down further for Threads. And I was finding myself trying to make what I was saying land on each platform just the right way, using the right titles, using the right scroll stopping phrases, trying to match it with images that would cause people to click. And somewhere in all that chopping and adjusting and optimizing, the thing I actually wanted kind of got lost. And then what I found that was happening was I was getting pulled into political conversations. And look, I have a perspective. I have things that I believe deeply. But I was finding myself in those comment threads and in those back and forths, I was finding myself that they really had nothing ended up doing with what I was actually cared about or what I was originally even talking about. And certainly not what I was trying to build. And every time I came away from one of those conversations, I felt worse. And I didn't feel worse because I engaged with people about what they thought, what they believed, where they were at. I'm open to that. I enjoy that. But why I felt worse, I think, is because I came away from those things more scattered, more less myself, if that makes sense. I found myself engaging in the noise. And that's not what I wanted to do. So then recently I just went to redo my website. I found that the website that I had built a while back, a year ago or so, just wasn't necessarily the direction I was heading in. I wanted to adjust some things. So I sat down to write out where I'm at, who I am, what I do, what I want to do. And the website just kept growing and getting more complex. And it started to not really look like where I'm at and who I am, but where I was thinking I was going to go or eventually be. And I didn't like that either. At some point, I just looked at what I was writing and what I was seeing, and I thought, this isn't me. This is a version of me trying to convince somebody of, and those two things are very different. And really, it had gotten performative. That's what I finally realized. Like, all of this shit was getting performative. Now, it wasn't dishonest per se, because it was me. It is where I want to go. It is things that I want to eventually offer, but it was performative. It's just all there is to it. And I could feel the difference. And the deeper thing that was happening for me was that I only have language for this now as I'm looking back on it, is that I was drifting away from the center of who I was. And the life I was actually living, the one that felt alive, the one that felt real and honest and really almost kind of magical for me, in the way that things were lining up in my life, that life was getting crowded out by the noise of maintaining a version of myself that didn't really fit anymore. And I'm fiercely protective of that feeling. And I call it a flow state, and call it whatever you want, but I'm very protective of that. So when life starts to kind of come together the way that mine has been in the last couple years, you learn to guard the pocket. You learn to notice when something is pulling you out of it. And so I started paying attention. Around that time, Substack kept coming up in conversations and recommendations. You should be on Substack, or have you ever heard of Substack type of stuff? And it's a great place for authors and writers and da-da-da-da-da. And it just kept kind of appearing the way things do when you're supposed to be ready for them. And I've learned the hard way, I've learned to listen to that. And when something keeps showing up, that's information. And I know now that you follow that information. And after a little while of listening, researching, thinking about, and hearing these things come up more and more, I made this switch. I stripped my website down to one page. I had this massive website built with who I was and what I was doing and what I offered and all these different things. And I just trashed it and stripped it down to one page. And I moved my writing to Substack. I started a publication and now this podcast called Building What Matters, because that's what I'm actually trying to do. Not building what looks impressive, just trying to build what matters. That night, after everything was done and the branding was refreshed and the website was done and the move to Substack had been completed and my subscribers had been notified and stuff, I don't know, I could breathe easier. I could think more clearly. The weight didn't really disappear. It just kind of changed. It became a weight I could carry because it was my weight. It was the weight of something that was actually mine. And that's what alignment feels like. It's not a dramatic reinvention. It's not blowing everything up and starting over. And I know there are times when that has to happen, but this was just a quiet decision to stop building for looks, for the optics of it, if you will, and just start building for something that was real. And that keeps me accountable. It keeps me centered, and it keeps me feeling honest, and it keeps me doing what I am doing because of who I am. And alignment is quieter. It's a little more quiet than it is impressive, and it's less performative. But for me, it's a whole lot more honest. And that's what I'm after. Do I love the applause? Of course. Do I love the recognition? I do. I love knowing that what I'm doing is impacting people, but I'm not doing it for applause or perception. Just the feeling that and knowing that what I'm building is actually mine. And this is where it gets a little more personal, because recognizing what's yours is only really the beginning. Because once you found that feeling, that pocket, that center, you have to learn to protect it. And that's a whole different kind of work. So let's talk a little bit about that. Alignment isn't a destination that you arrive at and then you're done. Like, you don't do the work and then the work is done. You just learn how to do the work so that when the work needs to be done, you know how to do it. So alignment can slip. And it's not always in big dramatic ways. Most often for me, at least in my experience, it's pretty subtle. It's a feeling that something's slightly off. It's a little bit of a low grade tension that you can't quite name. For me, it's a version of myself that starts showing up in conversations, doesn't quite feel like me. And the question is, what do you do with that? What do you do with that feeling? What do you do with that awareness when it comes up? Well, for most of my life, I would have ignored it. I'd have gone with the flow. I'd have kept the peace. I would not have said what I wanted or what I needed. I would not have stood up for how I was feeling or where my limits were at. I would have let the tension mean something it didn't, that I was wrong or too much, or that being honest was just going to cost me the relationship. And so I'd go quiet, or I'd adjust, I'd shrink a little and call it being easy to get along with. I don't know if have ever felt like that, but that's where I was at with that. But something shifted when I genuinely became secure in who I am. And I mean genuinely, not, again, performingly, but this confidence, not talking myself into things, but actually feeling settled and regulated and comfortable in my own skin. Because from that place, tension looks a little different. Tension doesn't mean someone who's going to leave, doesn't mean I'm too much for people, and it doesn't mean that I was wrong to say what I said or feel what I felt. It just means that something real is happening, and it deserves to be thought about. It deserves to be understood and named. So now when I feel that misalignment, whether it's in a relationship or in a conversation, in a decision I'm being asked to make, I don't ignore it anymore. I get curious about it. And here's what that actually looks like for me practically. I pause. It's as simple as that. And I mean, it's a real pause. It's not like I'm going to give it a day, see if this feeling goes away, pause. But it's an intentional time that I sit with it and I get quiet. I ask myself, where did this start at? When did I first start to feel this? What was happening in that moment that made this something inside of me kind of go sideways? And I meditate on it. I know meditation gets thrown out there a lot. And I wouldn't say it's some kind of formative practice for me, but I let myself think about it as the thoughts about it come up. I let it surface rather than manage it back down. Because when I pushed it down in the past, it really didn't go anywhere. It just shows up sideways later in a way that I'm really not prepared for. So once I do that, I kind of go back. I go back to the person, to the conversation, to the moment when the something went off. And I try to name it, try to figure out what it is. I try to look at it transparently, lovingly, honest, whatever it needs. I'm not going back to kind of win an argument or figure out what it is so I can say I did it. I'm going back because my alignment is off and I need to realign. I want to bring myself back to the center and bring the relationship with me if it's willing to come. And that's the practice right there. And it's not always comfortable. Naming something that got swept under the rug or going back to a conversation that already happened and saying, hey, I need to revisit this. That takes something special. It requires you really to believe that the relationship can hold the honesty. And not everyone is ready for that. But I found that the relationships that can hold it, they get stronger. And the ones that can't, well, that's information too to process and think about. Because what I really have learned is that what is yours is worth protecting. The life that you've built from the inside out, from your values, from the clarity that you have, the feeling of being genuinely you, that didn't happen by accident. That was earned. It was chosen. It was something that you tended to over time in the small moments that people never see. And that deserves to be guarded. Whether that means excluding people out of your life to protect it, whether that means shifting careers, jobs, realigning your family, whatever it is, that deserves your attention and it deserves your protection. And not to be defensive with it, not to be rigid with it, but defending it with a kind of quiet confidence that knows the difference between being challenged and being pulled off center, between growth and drifting. So when something feels off, that feeling is information. You learn to trust it. You get curious about it. Let it lead you back to you. That's alignment in practice, not a state you achieve once and you hold on to it forever. It's a place you keep returning to. Always go back to you. Now, everything I've talked about so far, the simplifying, the protecting, the returning to center, it all sits on top of something. And that something is a worldview. It's a way of understanding what's happening in the world and how I want to move through it. And I have come to think of it as living parallel. My mom used to say something when I was growing up that has always stuck with me. She used to say, just because someone else is doing it or just because someone else is saying it doesn't mean you have to. She would usually follow it up with something like, if somebody jumped off a building, would you do it? That idea kind of grew in me, and it got deeper when I got serious about my faith. Because in the Christian tradition, there's this concept being in the world, but not of the world. And for a long time, I understood that to be pretty narrow. I thought it meant to look different, act different, separate yourself from the culture around you. But the older I got and the more I've been exposed to other faith traditions, recovery communities for sure, ancient wisdom pathways, people who have no religion or no religious framework at all, but somehow embody more of what I thought Christianity was supposed to look like than the most of the churches that I've ever been a frickin' part of. That's how I began to understand this idea and how it's really grown in me. Being in the world, but not of it, is really not about separation. It's about allegiance. It's about asking, what am I actually living for? What am I building from? Whose values are shaping the way that I move through this world? And that question is what led me to this idea of living parallel. And I talk about it in terms of living parallel to the empire. Now, when I say empire, I'm not talking about one political party or one country or one specific ideology. I'm talking about a system. Any system. And they exist across the political spectrum, across institutions, across cultures. And it's any system that runs on power, blame, spin, and the management of perception. Any system that needs your reaction, your outrage, your engagement on its terms to sustain itself. And that system pulls hard at you. It always has. It wants you sorting people into sides, defending your corner, scrolling and reacting and performing your position for an audience that is doing the same thing right back at you. Sound familiar? I know that pull all too well. I've been in it. I've given into it. I've had to backtrack off of it. I've had to shift directions from it multiple times, especially because a lot of what I talk about, values and how we live and how we and what we owe each other, those things touch on politics, even when I'm not trying to be political. And sometimes people respond to that with heat. And there's a part of me that wants to respond to the heat with heat. But every time I go there, every time I engage in the reactive back and forth of the empire's arguments on the empire's terms, I come away more dysregulated, more depleted, less myself. And that's one of the things that gets me out of being who I am and more towards the performative side. It's a derailment, and it's what the empire wants. So what does living parallel to empire actually look like day to day? It looks like putting connection before agenda every time. It looks like love being the reason you do the things that you do and the way that you do them. Not sentiment, not niceness, but the real thing. The kind that tells the truth, that holds people accountable, and refuses to reduce anyone to a category. It looks like taking accountability for yourself, your history, your thinking, what you do with your feelings. The empire blames and deflects and spins. Living parallel to it means owning up to it, to yourself, to the people you've hurt, to the systems that you've benefited from, and then doing something about it. It looks like a particular posture in how I communicate. I've come to think of it as the prophet's posture, and I want to be careful here because I know the word prophet carries a lot of baggage with it. And I'm not talking about someone who predicts the future or speaks in a thundering voice of judgment, like the Old Testament prophets. I'm just talking about the voices throughout human history that stood at the edge of the noise, saw it clearly, named it truthfully, and pointed towards a better way. People who spoke not to condemn, but to invite, to remind people of what is right, how they used to live, what a better way could be, and invite people to that. They were people who didn't join their empire's arguments, but refused to pretend that the empire wasn't there either. They created a place for people to land when they were exhausted by the weight of it all. And that's what I want to do here. That's who I am. I don't want to win arguments. I'm not trying to build a platform for the sake of having one. I don't want to rack up followers or clout or influence in the way that the empire measures those things. I want to create a space, a place that is genuinely mine, built from values that I actually believe, and that makes room for people who are looking for something quieter and truer and more real. That's what living parallel looks like for me. Alongside the noise, but not in it. Not pretending that it isn't there, but not giving my energy to it either. Walking a quieter path and inviting whoever wants to walk with me. So let's bring this all the way back to where it started at the beginning of this podcast. I'm not interested in being impressive anymore. I'm interested in building something that is genuinely mine, that reflects who I actually am, what I actually believe, and where I actually want to go. That started with a quiet decision to simplify some things, to stop performing and start building for real. It deepened into a practice of protecting my alignment, of getting curious when something felt off, going back, naming it, correcting it, and returning to center. Now, as a leader of a nonprofit organization, that's how I lead as well. That's important for me, that what I believe and live in my personal life is good and true and right for my leadership as well. And underneath all that is a worldview. It's a way of moving through the world that says, I don't have to join the noise to be heard. I don't have to play the empire's game to win. I can walk alongside of it. I can name what I see. I can speak from my values. I can create space for people who are ready for something different. That's the pocket, and that's what we're building here together. If any of this resonates with you, I want to invite you to head over to my Substack, Building What Matters, where these 3 pieces are published in full. You can read them, sit with them, share them with someone who you think might need them. And if you subscribe to that, you'll get notified every time a new post or episode drops, so you won't ever have to miss what's coming next. And if you're listening to this podcast on, wherever you're listening to, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you found this, I genuinely appreciate a review. I'm 3 episodes in, and I'm building this thing from the ground up. So a good review helps more people find it, and that matters to me. It matters a lot. So I want to thank you for being here. This is Building What Matters, and I'll see you in the next one.